back. And we are going into tab 4, which is the budget update with Christinda Hansen, the Chief Financial Officer.
Yeah. Good morning. For the record, my name is Christinda Hansen. I'm the CFO for the Gambling Commission. And I have a presentation that I'm just waiting to share.
Yes. Do.
Thank you. So I was before you in January and gave you an update. This is just a further update from that. These numbers will be as of the end of January due to the statewide accounting lag in dates for when fiscal months close. Next slide, please. So this first slide is an overview of our revenue biennium to date. So this is 19 months of numbers. The allotted numbers are what was anticipated when these numbers were reported 19 months, well, 20 months ago. And then the actuals are where we are. You'll see, just as in the presentation in January, our numbers are down from where they were originally expected. I have two things to touch on would be tribal reimbursement. That number looks very low, but that is because tribal reimbursement is truly a reimbursement category. So that number is down because our expenditures were less than expected. So therefore the reimbursement level is less than expected. Our other sources of revenue, this is fines, fees, etc. That number is greater than anticipated because we can't ever really anticipate what we'll have for fines and fees. So overall, our revenue is down about $500,000 in these 19 months. Next slide, please. So our
quick question, if I can. So if you can go back to that one slide. So, and I'll just use vendor licenses and fees. So 2.7, is that what we would have expected as of that date in January, or is that for the full biennium?
No, this is to date in January. Yes. So this is allotted through the end of January and our actuals.
Okay. So those
yes.
are, okay. Thank you.
So these numbers are not including the fines or the tribal reimbursement. These numbers are a summary of our different license fees that we receive. So pre-investigation, licensing, EGL reimbursement, those types of things. And so this is a comparison of the fiscal month last fiscal year compared to the fiscal month this fiscal year. And you can see overall our numbers are down this year from last about $400,000. Next slide, please. And so at the same time, our expenditures have increased this year compared to last year through January, about $360,000. Part of that is because we are staffed more right now than we were last year at this time. A portion of that is also just because all of our expenditures are going up, which is a very common conversation these days with inflation. Next slide, please. So this is a capture of our licensees over time. These numbers are as of the end of each February for each of these years starting in 2019. These numbers don't represent the number of licenses we issue. These numbers represent the number of organizations that are licensed with the agency. So if an organization, say, holds a raffle and a bingo license, they're only counted once in these numbers. So you can see that in February 2019, we had about 1,100 of each of these types of licensees. 2021 reflects that expected dip because of COVID and shutdowns. But you can see that our nonprofit and charitable organizations have not rebounded anywhere near the rate that the commercial organizations have. And this is very impactful to the agency because without licensees, we don't have revenue. We are dependent on our licensing fees to cover the costs of our agency. So as we have less licensees, there's less potential revenue to help fund the costs of the agency.
Question. So previously you said that I'm trying to get a full understanding of why this is happening. It was inflation was one thing that you mentioned.
For
And-
increased expenditures?
Right.
Yes.
And also additional staffing this
Yes.
year. But another piece of the puzzle, part of the problem is that we have fewer licensees
So on the revenue side of things.
on the revenue
Yes.
side.
Yes, absolutely. So if you, if we were to go back to slide 3 and look at the decrease in revenue, that is partially because, largely because we have less licensees.
And it just looks like it was COVID that did it, just shot it down, right?
I wasn't here yet with the agency, but I would make a strong assumption that a lot of organizations chose not to renew their licenses when they couldn't operate. And then we just haven't seen them come back and choose to re-enter that line of business. So that's an assumption. That's not a data-driven statement, but it's a educated guess.
Are we, but we're not seeing the line slowly tick up post-COVID. It looks like it's,
So this is, 2021, there were still a lot of restrictions in February, but last year to this year, we're looking at less than 20 new charitable organizations that have rejoined. But we do see that the commercial numbers have come up, but yes, we're still short about 100 commercial organizations from where we were in 2019.
and so what percentage of a drop is that from 2019?
A little over 10% of commercial. I don't have the number, but just roughly, it's probably about 10% of our
10,
licenses.
okay, thank you.
If you'd like exact numbers, I can get those for you.
Nope,
Okay.
thank you.
So Madam Chair, if I may. Right, and if you have a slide for this later on, then I'll just wait, but this is number of organizations. Are you going to show a graph that shows like gross gambling receipts in both of these areas?
Can you roll to the next slide? This partially, yes and no, not exactly what you're asking for,
Okay.
Commissioner Sizemore, but this chart is at the end of each of these fiscal years. So this would be as of June 30 of 2018 and June 30 of 2022. So you can see these are number of active licenses in each category, so not organizations, which is what the previous was. And you can see that although our numbers are going down, the net receipts are
What numbers?
increasing. I'm sorry, the active license numbers. So if you look at the charitables, at the end of fiscal year 18, we had almost 1,500 active licenses. Now we have, a little over 1,200 active licenses. But that smaller number of licenses has greater net receipts. That's not necessarily helpful to us in terms of generating revenue because we have a cap in place per licensee. So if a licensee is already reported and their gross receipts have exceeded the cap, the rest of the business they do in the license year doesn't generate any additional revenue to help support us.
Question? So what does that indicate? That we have fewer licenses, but we have larger revenues?
So we don't have larger revenues, but they
Excuse me.
do. So they're simply doing more business per license on average.
So more people are purchasing pull tabs.
Yeah, or, the charitable nonprofits in this category is all of the charitable nonprofit licenses. The punch board pull tabs on this is the commercial. So speaking to the punch board pull tab specifically, they're either buying more or there's more of those existing licensees are selling the higher value pull tabs. But they are generating more revenue per license.
Is it reasonable to think that the entities that remain are doing more business because they're absorbing the customers from those entities that have gone away?
I unfortunately am not educated enough about the gambling industry and how, people continue to seek out that activity if it's not in their existing location. But I mean, something's driving more sales, whether it's more people or whether people are seeking out a different location. Yeah. Yeah. Next slide, please. So our fund balance review, the beginning of January in our fund, in our governmental fund, we had $19.6 million. Our January revenue was almost $3.7 million. I would like to note, though, that in that January revenue, we recognized all tribal reimbursement money that is due to us January through June. So a portion of that revenue reported in January is the tribal reimbursement money due for the rest of the fiscal year. So subsequent months, we won't be counting the tribal revenue or the tribal reimbursement in our monthly revenue numbers because it's been recognized here. And then our January expenditures were about $1.4 million. And then our reserved funds, these remain the same as they were when I last spoke in January. We are required to have that working reserve, and so that's $5.5 million. We have $9.1 million set aside for IT modernization. That project has been kicked off, so in future reports, that number will tick down as we're actually using that money. We have to redesign our website, otherwise we won't have one after November. The platform that our website is on is old enough that it won't be supported after November. So that's about $300,000. And then as we're familiar, the rest of the sports wagering loan is due in May, as well as that interest. And the Treasury just sweeps that money from our account. It will happen sometime in May is what I was informed, but we don't get to say when or how or anything like that. So then our fund reimbursements, tribal reimbursement for the actual sports wagering startup expenditures and interest will be coming back into our fund. And then some of the purchases that we have made of goods and equipment are eligible for the use of federal forfeiture funds. So we can transfer in $375,000. So at the end of January, that leaves us $5.6 million. And I'm going to revisit that number a little later. So just try and keep that number available. So that's the end of my budget update. If there's any other questions.
Thank you. That was helpful. Does anybody have any more questions? All right, doesn't look like there's any other questions, so I think we will go into the petition for discussion and possible.
Public comment on this.
You're not taking final action on this, so it's not necessary, but you certainly
Sweet.
can.
So back to tab 5, petition for discussion and possible filing. Staff proposed license fee adjustment, and that is Lisa McLean, the schools coordinator and policy manager.
Morning, Chair, morning, Commissioners. We're talking about tab 5, which is our staff proposed rulemaking. Crescinda and I are going to tag team on this, so she can show you more. If you recall, at the January meeting, the Commissioners accepted a staff recommendation to initiate rulemaking to address license fees. And Crescinda is going to show us the proposal that she has. But before she does that, I wanted to give you an overview of some of the stakeholders that we had done. And the commission staff held separate meetings with tribal partners and stakeholders, both on February 13th, 2023, and on February 27th, 2023. At that time, there were a number of questions related to fees and their correlation to the level of effort. Particular issues were that the cardroom licensees raised concerns about balancing the commission's need to raise its license fees against their petitions to us to reduce their own costs through adoption of proposed system efficiencies. And they felt that some of that was contributing to the reduction in licensees. Electronic raffle licensees asked the commission to consider a slower ramp up of costs until the overall expansion of the electronic raffle program across all sports clubs was complete. And then a pull tab distributor asked the commission to review the costs of licensing and regulating pull tab distributors. We also received a letter from Wendy Windsor, CFO of WOW Distributing, regarding the pull tab issue. We also got emails from Brian Keller at Let It Ride Casinos regarding the increased fee for fundraising events. Carolyn Kenyon from Freedom Flies related to the proposed fee increases and its impact on businesses. And then also from Richard Fritton from Home Plate Clubs, and John Scheffler and Bob Matern from Swinging Doors. I believe all of those were related to pull tab things. So finally, the commission staff also met with representatives of operating electronic raffles in February to hear some of their concerns about the proposed increases that were expected to be a barrier to expanding the electronic raffle program to additional teams in the state. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to the proposal from Crescinda. Do you mind if I leave this stuff here? No, that's fine.
So to add a little bit more and just give a little bit more background, we had an initial proposal on the fee adjustments when we met with the tribal partners and the stakeholders. And after hearing some concerns about costs and being able to evaluate our revenue that was for December of 2022 that was due in January, and also reevaluating revenue that would be required for a single fiscal year rather than the entire biennium, we evaluated our initial fee adjustments and are bringing forward what we're showing you today. Next slide, please. So we are proposing a 10% base fee increase. This is across the board except for electronic raffle. That was evaluated separately since it is a new activity, and also sports wagering is a different rulemaking conversation. So 10% base fee increase, a 6% quarterly gross gambling receipt rate increase, and a 60% maximum annual license fee increase. And then all the other fees that are charged to organizations such as name changes, additional locations, other organizational changes they might have that they have to pay fees for, we're proposing a 10% increase on those fees. Next slide, please. So these next few slides are just showing what the proposed rates would look like. Again, it's an across the board 10% increase. So for example, for the nonprofits, bingo and raffle are currently $65. The base fee would go up to $70. And then the maximum fees you can see there. The chart on the bottom of each of these next few slides shows you how many active licenses we had for each of these license types as of the end of December. How many of those licensees are paying the current maximum, and how many would be paying the maximum with these proposed rates. So for example, nonprofit raffle, as of the end of December, we had 822 active licenses. 34 of them currently pay the maximum. With applying the proposed rates, 21 would be paying the maximum. And please interrupt me if you have questions. Next slide, please. So for the commercial stimulant fees, the maximum for punchboard pull tab would be increased to $20,800. House bank card rooms would be increased to $64,000. With those proposed increases, we would see 30 punchboard pull tab licensees paying the maximum instead of 90. And for house bank card rooms, 26 would pay that maximum instead of 29. Next slide, please. So then for our other businesses, similar numbers, but for manufacturers, 9 are currently paying that maximum. And under the proposed fees, 8 would be paying the maximum. And then similar. The next slide though that I'd like to spend some time with, thank you. So this is showing you the average license fees for select license types. So basically the ones that we were just looking at. So what I did to come up with these numbers, every licensee that reported gross gambling receipts is included in these numbers. So any of those licensees that report 0 business for their entire license year, I removed from the pool to come up with these numbers. So with our current bingo nonprofit folks, they currently pay an average of $486 in licensing fees for their year. On average, that would go up to $552. So you can see those numbers for each of our categories. House bank card rooms, they currently pay an average of $34,892. That would go up to $53,120. And just a little bit about the reasoning about how we looked at the fee adjustments as we worked with our knobs and levers, as we've referred to them in the past. Increasing the cap helps everybody, helps the fees be less regressive and helps to have everybody pay an equal proportion of their gross gambling receipts to the extent that it's possible. And so adjusting the rate it's impactful, but it's the best way to be equally impactful again across our licensee types, where if we just increase the base, those entities that are doing business that never hit their base minimum calculation would be more impacted than those doing a lot of business. So
I need a little help.
Yeah.
And thanks for indulging me. Explain to me, please, why the average license fee for the house bank card rooms is so much higher on a percentage basis than for, say, on a percentage basis, as seems to be so much higher than these other businesses.
So the current cap for house bank card rooms is $40,000. So that's significantly higher than some of the other license types. We are proposing across the board increases, but I do know in working with licensing and regulation, we spend a lot of time working, our regulatory agents spend a lot of time with house bank card rooms. There's a lot of time and effort spent in the regulation of that specific licensee type compared to, say, a nonprofit raffle or a nonprofit bingo. So I don't know if Director Griffin has a little more background on the restructure in 2018, that would probably be helpful. I obviously wasn't here at that time.
You're doing great. So yes, and because our statute requires or allows us to set license fees that recoup the costs of licensing, regulation, and enforcement, in 2018, when these different knobs and levers of the base, the gross gambling receipts rate that was paid on a quarterly basis, as well as the maximum. It's my understanding from the CFO at that time that you have these different gross gambling receipts rates and base fees and maximums based on the tied more to the actual costs of regulating those particular activities, licensing of those activities, as well as the enforcement costs associated. So that is why you have differences.
And I would also add, for the house bank card rooms, we only have 40 house bank card rooms. And the top 3 house bank card rooms in their most recent license years had gross gambling receipts of 15.2 million, 16.6 million, and 19.2 million.
Oh,
So they're all capped. They're all paying the maximum. So that drives up the average when we're looking at data like this.
So what effective rate are those top 3 paying? I don't know if you'd have that. I mean, so right now, as I look at, so as of the time this was done, so there were 40 active licensees, 29 were paying the maximum.
Mhm.
So 29 of the 40 were paying less than 1.55% of their gross gambling receipts.
So right now, I apologize, I don't have the number for me. I believe it's 1.46% for housemate card rooms is the actual rate, but for
Oh,
the,
this is proposed,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
but for those top three housemate card rooms, their effective rate is about a quarter of a percent, anywhere between 0.20 and 0.26% of their gross gambling receipts. Under the new proposed numbers that we're talking about today, it would go up to anywhere between 0.3% and 0.42% of their gross gambling receipts.
So still a lot less than what those that haven't reached the max.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So. So then, can I get one more slide, please? So as I mentioned, electronic raffle fees, we looked at separately because they're a new activity. We have less than a year of information for them. But based on the level of effort that has been invested so far for this new activity, we found that the initial rates that were set are not supporting the cost to regulate them. So after some information provided by our other units and some projection about what it might cost in terms of hours to do, to regulate this activity after it's not new, we had initially proposed an $8,000 base fee and then this same rate and same maximum. After some feedback from the electronic raffle folks, as Lisa mentioned, and some concerns about barriers to entry, we evaluated and found that we could propose that fee at $5,500 because we're actually already authorized in statute to bill them for these actual expenses related to verifying their operating and system requirements. So currently for the electronic raffle and all licensees, they're billed for pre-licensing investigation. But in terms of electronic raffle folks, we had a lot of regulatory hours put in from their initial, I think they call it a temporary license. And then all the setup that had to be inspected and approved before they could actually offer a raffle. Those were all regulatory hours that we absorbed. So this proposal keeps the base fee lower, but allows us to bill for those actual expenses that hopefully helps with barrier to entry concerns. So that's my last slide for this. If there's any other questions.
So I have one quick one on that. I don't think, has anybody operated electronic raffles long enough to figure out if they're exceeding the maximum?
Their current rate is set the same as enhanced raffle. And if we project based on the seasons that raffles can be offered at, and based on the very limited data that we have, they likely would not exceed their minimum payment if their rate were left the same as enhanced raffle.
Minimum or their maximum?
Their minimum of $5,000
Oh.
because the enhanced raffle rate is so low.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so not only would they not come close to exceeding their maximum, it's projected that some of them may not even get out of that minimum base fee.
So just to conclude, this rule presentation, staff is recommending filing for further discussion, and the actual language in the WAC is attached. So I think that it was easier to hear Christina's version of what was being suggested than to read these WACs, but all of the language in the, that we're going to propose, if you approve, is there as intended.
Are there any questions? Any commissioners' comments on license fee adjustment? All right, is there any public comments?
First.
Wanna be first? You
First.
be first.
You were the first licensee, right?
Commission attendees, my name is Bill Tackett, and I'm the operator of the Buzz Inn Steakhouses. I think I was first licensed in May of 1973. And I've been in the industry steadily since then. And I also operate a house bank card room in Eastern Washington, Wenatchee. Well, I gotta say that this industry has changed a lot since we first started it. Frank Miller was my director that I really did a lot more work with, and I got involved with the compacts. With the first one, Wayne Williams was the tribal chairman, and Frank Miller was the director, and Bell and Ingram was the attorneys that put the first compact together. I was president of the Washington State Beverage Association at the time, and we had about 100 members, and we represented the punchboard and pull tab people. The governor directed us at the time to negotiate these contracts with the tribal, and the only money that we had as the Gavin Commission at the time, I think our first budget was 3.4 million or something, was punchboards and pull tab fees. And Frank told me, he said, just let us get these compacts done, and then we can move on, and we'll all prosper. So basically at the time, he said that there's a lot of future in the pull tab industry. We built that pull tab industry. I think it was at 1.2 billion. We had 1,970 licensees. We did prosper. It saved the tavern industry back when, you remember, we used to have way more taverns. Now there's very few of them. But pull tabs is a stimulus for us. It does, you got to establish a food and beverage program before you can apply for the license. And then however well you do in the food and beverage is how well you can do in the pull tab industry. But it supports 795 families today, and much more than that. And we are facing the same problem that you're facing. The first thing I looked at when our inflation hit us is paper cost. My paper cost went up $2,000 per restaurant. In 1 month, it was like, to-go boxes were $2. They used to be 58 cents. We got hit so bad that how do you recover from that? You immediately change your prices to go items and you add it on, and hopefully you can recapture. But before you do that, it takes you 90 days to realize how bad off you were. And so there's what happened. So we're in an industry right now that, I mean, if we keep going, we should be completely gone in 15 to 20 years. I mean, it's a handwriting on the wall. I'm paying double for paper goods now that I used to pay half for. And it's we only have 2 small manufacturers left in the state. The majority of them are out of state. We have a product that we only use 30% of. We buy 100% of the product, we put it out, we market it the best we can, and we take 70% of it and we throw it in the landfill because you can't recycle it because of the security. And we've been doing it for years and years and years and years. And I've been coming down here for 45 years. And, we buy this product. We used to count it by hand. We didn't get scales until 25 years ago. But if my scale goes down, guess what we do? We go back to counting it by hand. We should be able to figure out as an agency and as operators, some way to make this industry grow and not diminish. I mean, a new operator, this is way too big to take on when you're trying to build a food and beverage program and then add pull tabs. Well, it's asking for confusion and problems. We should be able to figure out some way to put something into effect that we can all prosper for. If we had a different type of a pull tab industry, the state could prosper, the license fees could be, nobody cares about paying a license fee if you're banking money. But time you take the fees are for our licenses, then you take the fees for the extra paper goods, and pretty soon that it's down to a point where, oh, and then by the way, another $1.25 in minimum wage. It's getting to a point where it doesn't make sense anymore. And I mean, we can either run this operation to the end and plan for it, or we can all get together and try to come up with just another way to do the same business that we're doing under the regulatory terms without paying this great amount of money for paper and then throwing 70% of it away. I can't imagine how many millions of pounds of that paper that is, but I'll tell you, it must be great. I just would like, if there was any way the staff and some of the pull tab operators, and I know there's like I say, 700 maybe left. There seems to be a way that we could get together and you guys could prosper, we could prosper, and we don't have to pay the great cost to the manufacturers in the other states. Thank you.
Are there any other public comments? License fees?
Josh Hirschlip, also with the Buzz Inn Steakhouses. And just to kind of reiterate a couple points on that, as it was brought up by the agency as to inflation, it's like those are the same things as he was stating that we're dealing with. And it's tough because we can't just shift all that to the customer. We're already having them take our increase on the minimum wage and a lot of the other expenditures we had. So as those license fees go up and we go from what was 98 rooms or near 100 rooms 10, 20 years ago, we were at 100 rooms. We're down to 38 rooms. I think it was stated 40, but I think we're at 38. On that scale, it showed we were losing slightly over 10% a year. I mean, it's one of those that if we just keep raising the fees, there's less people to collect the fees right till we're out of business. I mean, that's just one that it doesn't make sense with the cost going up. So I was just made aware of the fee increases because I'd been working the businesses. So I'd been contacted and told they were going up. So I'd ask the commission doesn't raise fees and relooks at that and kind of finds another way of helping us generate revenue versus just increasing our costs and running licensees out. Because again, I've had several people call me in the last year or so with restaurants and bars that are about to go out of business, that are seeing the writing on the wall and they want to leave. And one of my answers, because I've seen it through a lifetime of being a part of the Buzz Inns, is like, well, if you got pull tabs and you put in pull tabs, you could generate some revenue out of the same people that you have coming through your door and potentially save your business. Well, taking that and saying that to someone who's already struggling, already can't barely pay their bills, doesn't understand the pull tabs and how they work. And it's like, it can be, as much as I say that's an easy solution, it can be a detrimental decision if you don't operate them correctly and you open that door and you have these bowls unmanaged and theft goes out the window and you're not controlling your pull percentages. And then it just becomes an added cost and helps you go out the business quicker. So any way we can modernize, find revenue sources and not ways for us to spend money, I think would increase pull tab licensees and hopefully keep the card room industry intact. So I appreciate it. Thank you, commissioners.
I have a
Yes.
question for you.
But I don't hear you outwardly outright opposing the rule.
Well, I'm opposed to any increase, I guess I would put on the record. I mean, just as that it's one, I understand things have to go up and have to be covered. It just seems that that 60% increase is really, really large. I mean, and although it may only really affect those top three, when we're in business, we all want to be the top three. And it's one of those that it shouldn't be so much always punishment for doing a good job. I mean, it's one of those that we've got to find a way that I don't think it should just be hammered on those couple businesses and or the businesses that are right at the bottom. I think we're right in the middle. We're in the top 10, we're in the top 10. We find ourselves in the middle, but it's still a challenge in a small community. We've had a lot of management increases across the board because the labor market's been really tough. So as these minimum wage goes up, it's not just minimum wage I'm taking. I mean, my management teams have went up enormously over the last little bit just to maintain my staffs and keep my people and keep the business afloat. So, I mean, it seems like they're coming from all angles of increases and very little ways of revenue generating. So, I mean, again, I wish I was there for the discussions previous, so I could have contributed to that. I was brought in a little late and called, but I just wanted to voice my opinion of any increases are really detrimental, and it's tough to get new people operating as things go up. So appreciate it.
Great, thank you. Now, it looks like we have a public comment. And I apologize, I can't see your name, but through Johnson, perhaps?
Yes, thank you, commissioners and agency members. For the record, Drew Johnson, Director of Government Affairs and Compliance for the Seattle Seahawks. I want to submit a brief comment on behalf of the qualified sports teams to express our concerns of the significant fee hike that's unique to electronic 50/50 raffles. We do recognize the agency costs have exceeded projections, and we appreciate the agency working with us to slightly narrow those fees down. But the fact remains that this is a significant jump, especially on gross receipts, and will result in Washington having the highest 50/50 fees in the nation. So that leaves us concerned for the long-term viability of the game and its ability to maximize charitable benefits for Washingtonians. So we plan to submit a letter to further detail out those concerns and have some ideas as well as to how to grow the game and make this a long-running benefit for Washington.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Does anyone have any questions? Right, sure.
Just curious about the statement that it would make us the highest in the nation. Can staff comment on that?
I don't have any comments in regards to what other states are doing. All I know is this is the actual cost that we are bearing right now in regulating and licensing this activity. That has been our response in terms of coming up with the numbers that we have arrived at. And I will say that Crescenda has another comment or two that she just overlooked in her presentation.
Okay.
I would just ask when you're ready, Chair, if she might have a few more minutes.
Yeah, why don't we have Crescenda come up, and then if we want further public comment after they can hear everything, and we can do that.
My apologies, I didn't cover this in the first time. You may reflect that when I did my budget presentation, I asked you to hold on to that $4.6 million fund balance information. When we revisited how to, after our initial stakeholdering and tribal partnership meetings, when we were revisiting, trying to figure out how to not increase rates as much, one of the things we did was evaluate what we would need for the fiscal year and how much of our fund balance we would be comfortable dipping into if necessary. And so the part that I neglected to mention is that with these proposed fee increases, the anticipated revenue that will be generated will not be enough to cover our expenditures for the fiscal year. We anticipate using about $2.6 million of our fund balance. So that is significant. We have, that's not a sustainable solution, but it's something that we've discussed that we can do because we do have a fund balance, and but also with a very plain messaging that this isn't going, this isn't a permanent solution, and we may be back here in a year having a conversation about fees again. So my apologies for not including that in that.
No problem. Thank you for that updated information. Does commissioners have any questions regarding that? No?
So I guess I have a statement, if that's all right.
Sure.
So one thing, and those that have been around for a while, not as long as you, sir, may recall in 2014, I expressed some frustration with an across-the-board fee increase at that point. And then the agency delved into modifying the system to what we have today. And, still at this point, have come to the point to where we do need to do this kind of global change to the fee structure for the entire industry. I intend to ask the staff to embark on a greater conversation and a more in-depth evaluation of activity by activity of every facet of the structure. Base minimum, which, you know, when those of you that participated in the stakeholder work in 2016, 17, I think it was, that base fee was, you know, we want to make sure that people are invested in the activity that they're doing. So it's the kind of the price to get in. And then we wanted the rates to reflect, you know, a rational kind of relationship to the total that activity that we do in those particular things. And then for caps to just kind of knock off the real outliers so that, you know, so that we could kind of do that. I think the systems worked pretty well. I think, you know, those folks that used to shut down their bowls in mid-December or, you know, mid-June because they didn't want to go into the next class. I think those things have worked well. I think at the beginning of pandemic, had people paid their entire license year ahead of time in whatever, April of 2020, they would have been pretty disappointed that they couldn't operate. And I think it because of the structure, it helped tremendously for folks. If they're not having any activity, they don't have to pay anything other than the base fee if they're coming up on a renewal. So all of that to be said, I'm a little frustrated we're having to do it across the board, but I find that it's completely necessary for us to do this for now. But I am pledging to, you know, invest some time after this to be able to look at, you know, again, a little more in depth and a little bit more targeted in the future.
Thank you for that. Any other comments, commissioners, or questions? Director Griffin, did you?
Yes, so one thing that came up during stakeholdering that I think we also forgot to mention, and we'll have in the rule summary going forward, and that was when this would be applicable to licensees. And so this is our first increase under this new fee structure since 2018. So we'll carry forward what we have done in the past, and that is you will roll into this new structure as you renew. So make sure to include that in the rule summary moving forward.
Thank you. Anything else from any of the commissioners? Any additional public comments? The last bit of information. Julia, is there anybody online?
Oh.
Morning, commissioners, attendees. Barry Murray from Imperial Palace. A couple of quick just clarifications, I think, comments. There was referenced like the top three, which I think is in the $15-16 million revenue range. And really what that comes out to be, I think it was 0.25, 0.3% when you really do the fee, even though there was 29 as you go down, they're paying that capped fee roughly. So when you do the math on that, I mean, when you're doing $15-16 million, you know, that doesn't really move the needle as far as it's a blip when you have $10 million incremental in revenue of, say, the $5 or $6 million revenue card room. So something to keep in mind when it's a percentage basis like that, obviously. Or when it's capped and it isn't based on a percentage, I guess. So that's one thing that, you know, we just need to keep in mind for the middle of the road people and the bottom third people, et cetera. That's who really is getting punched, you know, with this. we're certainly on record as opposing, fee increases. We're struggling, with all the reasons that Josh and Billy brought up too, cost of goods, et cetera, that I've already commented on in previous meetings. And it's not going to go down. And I understand everybody has increased costs, but we got to think about big picture because that 38 licensees is going to go to 28, sometime in the near future. Then we're going to be right back here again with, and there's only so much, increase that can be done, in my opinion, before it's just not viable anymore for all of us. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. So anything from the commissioners now? Okay, are we ready to make a motion? The proposed license fee adjustment?
So I move to file the proposed license fee adjustments for further discussion.
Thank you. I'll second. All right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 All right, it has been moved and passed. So at this time, we're going to go into executive session, which will last for approximately 1 hour to discuss current and potential agency litigation with legal counsel, including travel negotiations. And then we will reconvene at 12:30 and we will finish the remaining 2 items on the agenda. Thank you.